So hello, everyone. I want to welcome you to the Stanley Museum of Art SMART Talk with Elizabeth Powell. SMART Talks connect research and practice at the University of Iowa to the Stanley Museum of Art's collection. It is made possible in part by the generous gift of Yvonne McCabe. This event is closed captioned. You can turn on the captions by clicking the closed caption button or selecting view subtitles. The chat and Q&A options are open, so please feel free to use them throughout this presentation. Please add comments to the chat and questions in the Q&A. We will answer all questions at the end of the presentation. Today, we're excited to have Elizabeth Powell with us. Elizabeth is a painter and printmaker in Burlington, Vermont. She received her MFA in printmaking from the University of Iowa in 2020 and her graduate degree in both the fine arts and economics from the University of Vermont. With interests that widely vary, Powell's background in both social science and art gives her a unique perspective in the art community, focused mainly on the economics of gender inequality. Powell's interest in the psychological impact of gender has spanned both her economics and fine arts education. As a graduate student in Iowa, Elizabeth regularly visited the Stanley Visual Classroom. In this talk, she will discuss her recent work in a variety of media, including monotypes, intaglio, foil, silkscreen, aquatint, linocut, and woodcut. And she'll connect it to prints by Ed Paschke, Miriam Shapiro, and others in the Stanley's collections. So thank you for being with us today, and please welcome Elizabeth Powell.
Hi, thank you for having me. And I'm just going to start to share my screen. Here it is, share. And I'm going to make this full scale. Okay, so I wanted to start this lecture by giving a brief overview of my work before grad school so that we can then talk about my experiences with the Stanley Museum during school. I went into grad school with a very limited knowledge of printmaking processes. I was really only familiar with dry point intaglio, which is basically scratching into a copper plate, and stencil monotype, where I was inking up sheets of plexiglass and blocking out shapes with newsprint stencils. This is how I created the image you are currently viewing. And here is a picture of some of my newsprint stencils. My technical naivete greatly limited the types of surfaces I could create in my images. And they pretty much consisted of flat, glossy layers of color without any sort of shading. But in some ways, being limited to the relatively simple process was good for my artistic development, as it freed me up to focus more on my imagery and the conceptualization of my imagery. At the time, I was very interested in Rorschach tests and implicit associations. I was also thinking a lot about the shape of the female body and over-the-top lingerie because of the way it forces the body into a series of geometric shapes rather than organic ones. So I was making these images with black blots that were stand-ins for the female form, but could also be vases or vessels. In other words, they were also objects. In conjunction with the blot forms, I was also creating nets or cages inspired by lingerie. I'd use the multiplicity in printmaking to churn out these patterns from the sources of inspiration. As you can see from some of my more recent work, both the implicit figures and nettings are still present. This is an intaglio from, I believe, December of 2019. And so the techniques I use have changed quite a bit since I went to grad school. So going into grad school, I had a lot to learn. And this is where it became very helpful to have the Stanley Museum at my disposal, because it gave me access to prints by all sorts of wonderful artists, allowing me to see how various printmaking techniques such as intaglio, woodcut, and silkscreen can be used and the kinds of surfaces they can create. one of the first mediums I explored in grad school was silkscreen. And right away, I knew that I wanted to incorporate more values and shading into my artwork. Incidentally, silkscreen is not the best choice of medium for that. To get the washy backgrounds you can see in these images, I had to print numerous layers. I believe this particular print had 19 layers, and I wasn't even happy with the surface I got in this because silkscreen is very matte, and I was used to a more luxurious glossy finish from oil-based ink. This is where some of the prints I saw through the Stanley Museum and my research into specific artists really helped me improve my work using techniques in ways that were suited for them rather than trying to force whatever process I happened to be learning at the time into doing what I wanted. At the beginning of my grad career, I was very interested in the Chicago Imagists, a sort of funky group of artists from Chicago in the 60s and 70s. The Imagists have a variety of interests with very disparate subject matters, and the only threads that really tie these artists together are their connection to the Art Institute of Chicago and a sort of willingness to embrace their odd obsessions and interests in collecting things, which is why I found them very interesting, because I was, of course, had my own odd obsessions that were being integrated into my artwork. This is a print owned by the Stanley Museum by Ed Paschke, and he was one of the Imagists, or is one of the Imagists. And at one point I asked to see prints by some of the Imagists, and I was shown these. At the time, I was learning about etching, and if any of you have tried etching, you know that it's a very laborious process, and you're not going to be doing 19-layer etchings because that would be really nuts. So the good thing about etching is that it is far easier to incorporate more values into your work, but the caveat is that multiple colors is more difficult, and I really love using color in my work. This is where the Paschke prints were really helpful. The images I have shown are lithographs, not etchings, but in them Paschke uses a black key layer that provides the image with all of its shading, a technique that can also be used in etching and so many other printmaking processes. This is a good way to limit the number of layers you need to print, because you don't have to separate plates for each color, to use separate plates for each color. If you're smart about it, you can print multiple colors at once and then use a key layer to add in all your values, making a print a 2-layer print rather than a 3 or 4-layer print. It's a really common way of building an image, but remember that I was fairly novice at this point, and people had told me about using key layers, but it really didn't sink in until I saw the Paschke. And then I was like, oh, I can use this in my own work. So here is a print where I incorporated a key layer into, it's a large 2-plate intaglio. And you can see on the left is the print with just the key layer. So it's black and white, it has all the values. And then on the right, I also printed a color plate. The next image was also created with a key layer, though it's a woodcut, not an etching. So this way of building an image wound up being very helpful in multiple kinds of printmaking. So anyways, moving on, I would often go to the Stanley to see groupings of prints in their visual classroom, which was great in helping me learn the potential of each medium that I was learning or that I was working with. I saw this aquatint on one such visit, And it was really helped me to see the soft sort of surface you can get with intaglio, which is one of the reasons I love the medium so much. I became interested in creating prints with just such surface. And here is an aquatint that I made where I was exploring kind of the softness of intaglio. Here's another version of the same print where I also added in foil, which is a plastic layer. And I really liked having sort of the hard versus the soft in this one little print. It's very small. Incidentally, this is another aquatint print I made. So incidentally, this is a Liechtenstein print that I saw at the Stanley quite often as it was hanging for a while. And it is not foil, but it's got a plastic Rolex layer, which is a holographic plastic, very much like foil. And that's what the blue is. And what I love about it is that it's such an effective use of holographic plastic. And I got very interested in foil while I was at the University of Iowa. And here is some of my work with more holographic foil on it. So what I'm really trying to say is that it was very important for me to see examples of how other people use techniques in their own work, because it got my ideas flowing and it made me want to figure out how to make it work for my own imagery. Oh, whoops. I don't know how to go back. Oh, here it is. So another example of how the Stanley Museum prints helped me is this print by Agnes Weinrich. It is a woodcut done as a jigsaw print where the plate is cut up into multiple pieces. Each piece can be inked up with its own color, and it's a great way of making a multicolored print with just one run through the press. So you can tell it's a jigsaw print by the lines around, the thin, light white lines around each shape. I didn't know about this technique before I saw the print at the Stanley, and here I created my own jigsaw print. This is actually two prints that I turned into a diptych. The one on the left has two different kinds of foil layers on top as well. And the one on the right is just the jigsaw print in its natural form. The last images from the Stanley I'm going to show you are by Miriam Shapiro. And I'm going to move on from this image really quickly because it's blurry, which is not great. But Miriam Shapiro, I saw the last image in the Stanley and I had never seen Shapiro's work before. And I was really interested in it right away because she's a feminist artist and she uses a lot of floral motifs and patterns, and that was right up my alley. So Shapiro, it was very important to my development to have been exposed to Shapiro's work. In this one, Shapiro uses collage and kind of a mixture of print and litho and fabric and thread. And I never really thought about collage too much in conjunction with my own work, because collage I've associated so much with Dada, and Dada's fascinating conceptually, but visually it just never really was my thing. So seeing Shapiro's work, I realized that there are really beautiful, sort of more integrated ways of using collage in your artwork. And here is a triptych of some collage woodcuts that I created by chopping up a woodcut and then collaging it back together with a little foil as well. On the right, you can see the blue foil. So there are also links between Shapiro's work and my MFA exhibit. She really did affect me quite a bit. And, you know, the MFA exhibit is the culmination of your grad career. And in this, I used fabric to create a large backdrop within which I placed my prints. Shapiro used fabric in her work, and she liked to toe the line between fine arts and crafts and merge sort of prints and fabric, which is very much what I did in my MFA show as well. So just to sort of sum up what I've been trying to say, is that the material I use to create work and the surfaces I get in my artwork are really integral in it and the conceptualization. And it was only through seeing the works of other artists that I could really fully explore how to use print to its fullest. And throughout grad school, materiality just became more and more important to me. The museum really helped me explore mediums, and it was really wonderful having that at my discretion. I am currently out of grad school and am making paintings instead of prints. And I'm trying to figure out the best way to use paint in my artwork. And it's difficult because there's so many different kinds of paint, so many different ways of using it. And I'd love to be able to go into a space and see, you know, impasto versus glazing, acrylic versus oil, and etc. And that's what you get with the visual classroom at the Stanley Museum. So that's it. Thank you. I don't know, stop sharing, I guess. Okay.
Thank you, Elizabeth. For our attendees, do you have any questions for our guest? Well, I'll start out. You mentioned that you have recently started painting in your practice. How is it similar, or how is it different to your printmaking process?
Well, printmaking, like I said, printmaking has become a very integral part of the conceptualization of my artwork. I like to compare intaglio and the flattening of the press to sort of it's like I compare it to actual metaphorical Spanx, and sort of like pressuring women into being certain forms, you know. So it's different because that flattening is no longer there. So I have to figure out a different way of using paint and figuring out how it can work conceptually in my work as well. And that's difficult, you know, that's just really difficult. It has been fun because you can sort of do more with color, and I've also been trying a lot of impasto to try to build up surfaces, and then have other things like my nets that are pressing things back. So, you know, it's been a real exploration.
And we do have a question. Yes, can you discuss influences beyond art that inform tour work?
Oh yeah, okay. So in undergrad, I was very interested in politics and economics. And what I was really curious about was how the behavioral economics work. Sorry, this is not scripted, so I'm having a little bit more trouble putting this into words. But basically, people are raised in certain ways, and that creates socioeconomic outcomes that are different. So women are raised and tend to be raised and treated in a way that creates different economic outcomes in the end than like men. And then that goes for races as well. So I was very interested in this because, there's so many little nuances to how you're treated as a woman, like, being told that you need to be more quiet and a little softer and nicer and to smile and all that stuff. And so I studied a lot these sort of behavioral economics, these little ways of raising our children to make them a certain way when they grow up. And I think that's affected my work a lot. Um, so does that
Okay.
answer the question?
We do have another question. It seems that your work moved from utilizing forms influenced by undergarments to the imagining internal forms. What was the thought process behind this?
I don't think I ever really sort of thought this is what I'm doing. I'm moving, I'm changing. It just sort of happened naturally because I like to draw a shape and then redraw it and redraw it and redraw it. And so it's like the slow abstraction of something that I actually see in nature, like the female form. And I think just as I kept abstracting these shapes, they became more um, sort of visceral and they started to look like organs. And I liked it because it was a little grotesque, a little gory, but I could also make it beautiful. So it's this kind of odd combination, unexpected.
And beyond printmaking influence, who are some of the artists that have influenced you in your life?
Well, I did mention the um, the Chicago images, and one of those images is Christina Ramberg, who does these really beautiful, or did these really beautiful paintings of sort of corseted bodies, and there's so many. I'm really into Helma F. Clint right now, and I've been looking at a lot of Louis Bourgeois, and I tend to go for female artists, but yeah.
Okay.
So, anything else?
I do not believe we have any more questions at the moment. So is there anything else you would like we did get one. In current work, there also seems to be a lace-like net that is present. How does scale influence this?
I've been thinking about that a lot because going into painting, I've been sort of scaling down and making very small images. And the work I showed from my MFA was, of course, very large scale. And I think the large scale, I like to have a combination of both because I think the large scale really creates an environment and it's sort of more enveloping and entrapping. And then having these sort of small scale nets and lacy forms, it's more intimate. So I definitely kind of like to explore both avenues, but I think it's becoming a little more intimate.
Okay. So I am not seeing any more questions coming up. And right before that last one popped up, I was asking if there was anything you wanted to add in terms of your current work or a show that you have coming up that you would like to plug.
Okay. Yeah, so I wish I'd added some slides of my most recent work. You can see it on my website, I guess, elizabethpowellart.com. But I do have a show coming up. It's at Cano in Otega, New York, which is upstate. And it'll be on, it's mid-November, it'll be on display. And I'm going to be kind of changing up my MFA show and making it work for a new space. It's in a old mansion, so that'll be interesting.
And is this a COVID friendly show? Will we be able to view it online?
I haven't actually thought of that because I've been trying to work out the technicalities of just like getting there and putting the work up. I haven't thought about what happens once it's up. I'll ask about that. I'm sure there's going to be some sort of online component, and I'll definitely put it on my own website. So,
all right. Well, I want to thank you for being with us, and I want to thank the people that attended the session today. Right.